Hi, everyone. This is Tribeca New Music. My name is Maya, and I'm here with the amazing Maryanne Bertollo. I hope I said that correctly.
Yes, you
Um,
did.
and we're here to talk about a new opera that is being read on October 2nd. And thank you so much for being here. I wanted to know how you got into opera, what's your musical background, and how you got involved with Ed to create this opera.
Oh, yes, thank you for asking. I am living proof that anyone can get involved with opera. I actually started really getting into opera when I took a job at the Metropolitan Opera as a development associate, and we get free tickets to all the operas. And I do not have a classical music background. It took me a while to get into the form of opera. And then suddenly I realized, oh, it's just like a great musical with higher voices. And I knew Ed Chinek, the extremely talented composer, through a mutual friend. And one day we went to an opera together at the Met, and we were saying, hey, we could do this. We could write an opera. And he had done a musical piece called Frankenstein, based on Elizabeth Frankenstein, her tale, and on the book Frankenstein, obviously the classic novel. And I said, hey, let's do libretto based on that. And then we won a New York State Council of the Arts grant for it. We put it on at the Self Theater 2 years ago, and that was the beginning of our collaboration.
That's fantastic. And I saw that you write, you self-publish, how's that process in turning, a book format into more of libretto and connecting it to opera?
Yes. Okay. So my books that are self-published on Amazon are historical novels based on the lives of women in the 19th century. That's a big pet subject of mine. But actually, when I wrote "Returning the Ordeal of Olive Oatman," it's a totally original piece. So there's no book behind it. I just had always loved the story of Olive Oatman, which is a true story. I had read about her a lot as a kid. And so when Ed and I were thinking, oh, what do we want to do for our next opera? I thought, hey, this would be such a dramatic, moving piece to put on the stage. So I created the libretto basically from scratch, but the same talents, or if I can use that word, or the same techniques apply. When you write a libretto is when you write an opera. You have to know your characters, you have to bring out the best in them, you have to do witty dialogue, you have to use words in the best way possible. So it's definitely a transferable skill.
Yeah. And so why do you think it's important to tell these stories of women in the 19th century and also, nowadays and in the past? How do you think that empowers or tells a story as a storyteller yourself?
That's a great question. The reason I love looking at women's lives in the 19th century as opposed to, say, medieval times or the 1920s or any other time period is I think the Victorian period was basically a mirror of our own period. So they're sort of like the two sides of the same coin. So I think a lot of the things that women went through in Victorian times are so relevant to women today. They're in a different guise, but they're basically the same old things, just in a different form. So that's why I think that the lives of women in the 19th century are so relatable and valuable for the women today.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree when it comes to, I think there's always been a strain of continual shared experience in women and other,
Oh, very much so. Very
yes,
much so. And a lot of the problems that Olive confronts, and even that Elizabeth Frankenstein confronted, women can see these operas and really feel like I can identify with that character, particularly Olive, who faces so many challenges and really has to learn to speak up for herself and go from being a victim to being a survivor.
that is an amazing story. How was the process writing Frankenstein versus Olive? Is there intersection where their stories connect? Um,
Mhm.
and how was the process with Ed as well, as a collaborator? How did you feel creating this one as opposed to 2 years ago when you first said, oh, we can build an opera together?
Yes, thank you for asking. With Elizabeth Frankenstein, I think that is a very romantic piece in the old style, capital R, romantic vein. And with Olive Oatman, I think we've gone into more realism. And I think it's a bit more gritty, and it really, digs down at the heartstrings. When we tell the story of Olive, Elizabeth is moving, but it's moving in a more abstract fairy tale like way. Olive Oatman is something that you could see on Netflix, or you could definitely really envision yourself being Olive, I think, in ways where Elizabeth Frankenstein may be a little bit more idealized. So the process of me working with Ed, he is just such a wonderful partner. And what we do is actually, I write the libretto. This happened in both cases. I write the libretto, give it to him, and then he sets it to music. So I do the entire libretto first and then hand it over to him, and he does the music. And then we will go over it together, and he will say, oh, was this the mood you were wanting to capture in this scene? Is this what Olive should be feeling? And so we really fine tune it then as a team.
That's great. I love to see how the process works. I love opera, but I've never really understood how the librettist and the composer sort of collaborate in that way, because I feel like it can be hard. But yeah, when you get the text and you're like, this is how it's supposed to feel, then it's really helpful to see that.
Oh
Um,
yes, I just wanted to say that we do work together so well that it's just a joy to do it. I don't know if I could be, creating these librettos with anyone else, because I know that he is so sympathetic when he writes the music, and he is really committed to bringing out the best in the story, as well as just, creating wonderful original music.
I love that you can also, just have a wonderful relationship with.
Yeah, we definitely, we hang out together. We're very comfortable, speaking the truth to each other about the piece, and it's really a seamless collaboration. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's the mark of a good collaboration, is when you can really be honest with each other. And I think
Hmm.
it's really important, for modern musicians today to see how important cross collaborative and immersive experiences can be. So also I wanted to ask about how your experiences development sort of has helped your musical journey as well, because I'm also an artist, but I also work in administration and social
Hmm.
media. And I think having those skills is really important. What kind of
Hmm.
advice would you give to people in these positions who are also performing on the side or creating on the side? But, that's their passion.
Yes, it is very hard, obviously, for all artists. It probably always has been hard all through the ages, of kind of having a double life or a split life, where you have your work life and you have your creative life. The advice I would give to any young artist would be to find a job or a position where you're enjoying it enough that you can go home at night and do your writing. If you're in a job where you're really stressed out, or it's really toxic, and you come home, or you wake up early in the morning hoping to write, it's just not going to flow. So I think, like anything else, it's a work life balance that is very important for artists especially to have, because if you have that balance, you will have energy at the end of the day to create. But if you don't, it's going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, that's super good advice. I feel like sometimes I get burnt out and I'm like, oh, I don't want to play violin this afternoon, but you always have to remember, like, this is what I want to do, and
Yes,
I need to
yes.
focus on that as well. And so finding that balance is important.
Very much so, very much so. And you do have to, I do think you have to prioritize your passion. And I think it's a matter of, what do they say? It's a matter of working to live, the way the Europeans look at it, not living to work. You can have a steady job, and you can do a great job at your job, and you can enjoy your job, but your priority as an artist still has to be for the passion and the radiance you feel for what you're creating.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I hope my boss thinks so.
Yeah. So another thing that I have to ask you is sort of, after COVID, I know the opera world has had a hard time with regenerating post-pandemic, and I just wanted to hear your perspective on how modern plays and modern opera can facilitate growth in the opera world and bring it back to the magnificence that it was before COVID. I think hit every single, not only opera, but
Oh,
every
yeah.
single art form was heavily affected. And what are your thoughts on the future of modern opera?
Well, I know from working at the Met Opera that the Met Opera has come back very strong, and of course, it was a challenge when we were all working at the Met Opera doing fundraising and development during COVID. That part never stopped. We were working remotely, and people were remarkably generous in giving to the arts during the worst of COVID, which was really heartwarming. So I think people always look to the arts in times of things like pandemics and great struggles and find solace and strength in the arts. So I think that knowing in your hearts how important it is, how knowing that the arts might be something that helped you get through COVID, and we were told that a lot. But when we would call on behalf of the Metropolitan Opera, speak to people on behalf of the Metropolitan Opera, I think it's in the long run, it's strengthened theater from an idealistic point of view. Obviously, it's a struggle for individual theaters to get the money and to come back. But in terms of people really recognizing the importance of art, especially classical art forms like opera, and things that might have been subjects that might have been a little deeper than they might ordinarily have partaken in. I think people really came to a new understanding of that importance. So in that sense, I think that the arts triumphed over COVID. And I think as time goes on and things keep returning more and more to normal, that theater will come back very strong because it's a basic human need. It's been around, probably since caveman times in some form or another. And I don't think it's going away. But what I think new artists or young artists can take from it is that people really are inspired by art in times of struggle, and that it is not a superficial thing to be an artist or to create a piece of art. So in that sense, I think it's been very inspiring.
Yeah, I know I always ask this question about how COVID has affected, but then I also have to remember every time that art and music is fundamental to human.
They're enduring. They've endured the Great Plague, and they've endured wars, and they've endured earthquakes, and every tragedy you can think of, and they always come back in new and better form. So I think that I don't think we have anything to worry about directly that way. Obviously in terms of being able to get people physically back into theaters, it's great to have seen people returning in droves to the Met Opera. And, I think hopefully that period where people have been, afraid to go into a theater has abated with the strength of the new vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it seems like things have gotten back to normal here in New York.
Yeah, they're much closer to normal now than they were even 6 months ago.
Which is very nice. I am happy about that. I think taking violin lessons on Zoom was very interesting for sure.
Oh yes. And I know people who took acting classes over Zoom and did all kinds of theatrical things over Zoom. So that that in itself shows the adaptability of artists and art forms.
So tell me more about Olive and how you sort of developed the story for the opera.
Mm-hmm. Olive Oatman was a real woman, a Mormon woman who was taken captive in 1851. And later on, she is then adopted into a more benevolent Native American tribe called the Mojave. The Mojave adopt her as a daughter of the tribe. Unbeknownst to her older brother Lorenzo survived an attack on their family. She thought all of her family had been killed, but he has been looking for her for the 8 years she's been in captivity. And he, when he finds her, he wants her to come and live with him and to come back into traditional white society. So what returning the ordeal of Olive Oatman is primarily about is it starts when she is returned to Lorenzo, and it is about her inner struggle between what her life was like as a Mojave daughter and what her life will now be like as a Victorian white woman in a patriarchal society. So it is about the fracture that is created in her spirit by that and how she ultimately resolves it. So there have been a lot of books written, and I don't know if movies have been directly made about this story, but there's certainly a lot of written material about the Olive Oatman who is living with Native Americans. What I wanted to concentrate on was the psychology behind her returning into society and now becoming yet another person and being asked to take on a totally different social role and what that would do to a person inside.
I noticed that Natalie performed in Frankenstein and is also
Yes.
some of the same cast or coming on to this
Yes.
performance. Have you been able to work with them and, set the tone for the differences in those performances?
Yes, we were so excited. Ed and I were so excited to have Natalie return. She was a wonderful Elizabeth, and we knew she'd be a wonderful Olive. So we actually asked her if she would do the role. We were thrilled when she said yes. We would love to have had everybody back. Unfortunately, because everyone has such diverse schedules, it was hard to do so. But the people that we have cast in the roles are all so phenomenal. They're all bringing so much energy and so much enthusiasm to this piece. And the characters in Olive are really characters with a capital C. They all have very strong personalities and very distinctive voice parts. So I think that the ultimate show is going to be so dynamic, and they've all been a joy to work with.
Lastly, I just wanted to ask what you're listening to now, what your musical inspirations are when you're writing. Do you listen while you write?
Mm-hmm.
Do you write and then listen?
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting question, because as I had said to Ed, who of course has a wonderful classical background, he's the composer. As I said to Ed, my background is more in literature. So when I was writing the libretto for Elizabeth Frankenstein, I was really searching for musical inspiration. And to be perfectly honest, my favorite things are those musicals, like Porgy and Bess or Sweeney Todd, that kind of cross over the line. They're not the really grand opera, but they're deeper and sung in higher voices than musical. So when I was writing Elizabeth Frankenstein, I listened obsessively to Sweeney Todd because I loved the lyrics. I just thought the lyrics of those songs are so beautiful. And then when we were writing returning the ordeal of Olive Oatman, Ed and I had discussed incorporating classical 19th century type music along with Native American influenced music. So I was listening to some Native American music that I found on YouTube, and I was also listening to things like hymns, because we actually created an original hymn and returning the ordeal of Olive Oatman. It's actually from the Bible. It's from a passage in the Bible, and so I was listening to like the Stephen Foster route when I was doing Olive Oatman, to kind of steep myself in the type of music that Olive herself might have listened to.
So lots of character work is what I'm
A
hearing.
lot of character work. It's very character driven, yes.
Yeah.
With any historical piece I do, I always have a great awareness, a direct awareness of how it would translate into psychology now. I think so many people now, especially women, face fractures inside of themselves, who they're expected to be as opposed to who they want to be. So this opera is for them, and it's also for anyone who has experienced profound loss. Olive is a very inspiring figure who has gone through great sorrow, and at the end of the opera, the different fractures in her soul are knit together in a dramatic and musical way. So even if you are not particularly interested in history, it's definitely an opera that can move and really keep the interest of people from all different backgrounds. And we also have a very diverse cast as well, and we're very proud of that also.
That's fantastic. Yeah, everyone wants to be known and wants to be understood and
Exactly, and wants to be their real selves. And it's very difficult. And this is some of what, this is beyond the Western story. I mean, it is a Western to a certain extent, but beyond that story, it goes much more into those sorts of issues.
yeah, I think that is super important, especially for this day and age when I
Hmm.
think we can lose ourselves a lot
Very
in
much
in
so.
what's going on in the world, in our own self, in our own journey. And I think it's great to be able to connect with music and art that reflects our lives, even if it may be, in the Wild West.
Exactly. So it's an excuse to escape back into those times and into that setting, but it also will really have, I hope, a profound meaning. But that doesn't mean you have to sit on the edge of your seat and take notes. And the meaning will just wash over you, and you can enjoy the music, and you can enjoy all the fun characters as well.
Yes, amazing. Well, October 2nd at the
Yes.
National Opera Center at 7 p.m. If you want to go to our website, tribecanewmusic.org, we have an opportunity to buy tickets, get more information. There's also a written interview. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you. This is going to be
Thank
great.
you. We'll keep our fingers crossed for great success. And it was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.